Welcome to Legal Candy. I am Attorney Candice Colucci, your host, and we are here with our co-host for today, Ms. Darby Mitkus. She's here. And so today's episode, we are going to talk about probably what everyone has been hearing about is the name Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
The infamous Gypsy Rose.
Gypsy Rose. If you don't know who Gypsy Rose is, we are going to talk about her today. Literally trying to prepare for this episode, I'm like watching the video and my husband's like, what is going on here? His mind is just blown because I'm telling him about all these concepts about who she is, what she did, giving details of the murder, details of what her mother did. And we were watching some of the documentaries that have been out. And he's just flabbergasted by the entire thing.
The case was so unique. I really don't even know how any attorney would take this case on. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I know. And I think what was so interesting about this is one of those documentaries that every single time they interviewed either a police officer or a state attorney or a defense attorney, I think everybody started off by going, nothing was as it seemed. That's what it kept on saying. They kept on saying nothing was as it seemed, and this was such a unique set of facts that I think everybody was kind of like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
What do we do?
I think if you didn't have trust issues in life, this case gave you that.
Exactly. I mean, I think what kept on reoccurring over and over and you kept on hearing was that how many people had truly failed Gypsy in order to get her to the spot that she ended up being at, to where she ended up murdering her mother, being a part of murdering
I know,
her mother.
it's just really interesting. You have empathy for a murderer.
Yeah.
It makes you feel some kind of way.
It does. And I think it's such a polarizing, I think it's one of those polarizing things again, is that now that, so Gypsy now has served 8 years of her 10-year sentence of being a part of the plot to murder her own mother. And we'll go over why she did that. But people are celebrating her release as her being this hero who stood up for herself, but also murdered her mother. But then there are people who are looking at it like, we should not be celebrating somebody who participated in the brutal murder of her own mother. So let's get into that. I'd love to hear everyone else's opinions. We've got some comments that have already come to us online. But to go into our legal disclaimer, just to remind everybody that nothing we give here is considered legal advice. If you have any specific questions, please reach out to a qualified attorney. I am one, but I'm not yours right now. And also remember that some of the facts that we go over today may be not 100% factual. We're getting them from public records, so we can't tell you that 100% everything we say is exactly how it took place. We're taking it from the information that we've been receiving online. And so if you'd like to do your own research, you're more than welcome to do that. So let's get into some of those background facts. So right now, everybody's up in a roar right now is because Gypsy Rose has been released, and she is on TikTok.
She's hot.
Right?
She's a hot topic.
Is.
Million followers on Instagram alone.
She's
8 million followers.
She's
already.
the it girl right now. She's married. She's talking about her husband online. She's got some spicy comments.
Another documentary
show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why I think people are just already shocked by it, because they're like, are we putting a murderer on a pedestal and looking at her as a hero? So let's talk about what kind of took place. So on June 14th, 2015, the sheriff's departments in Greene County, Missouri, found the body of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard face down in her bedroom of her house just outside of Springfield, lying on a bed of pool of blood from stab wounds inflicted several days earlier. There was no sign at the time of her daughter, Gypsy Rose, who was 23 at the time. And so they started this huge investigation, try to figure out. The very beginning of the investigation, it was a brutal murder. There's blood everywhere. There were 17 stab wounds. I think one of the reports stated that it was so horrific that Dee Dee's head was almost decapitated.
Oh my God.
And so very traumatizing once they got there. And this was a family who, once now we're looking back at it, kind of had notoriety in the area, right? Because they were, what we know of the background of Dee Dee and now Gypsy Rose was that the story is that Gypsy Rose had all these different ailments. She had all these different types of symptoms and diagnosis, and they were like this poster like family between the mother and the daughter of like putting themselves out there. They were in local news stories. They were survivors of Hurricane Katrina. It's a nice little crossroads because, you know, our passion when it comes to hurricane and the survivor. So they had survived Hurricane Katrina, lost everything from what they had said. And now Dee Dee is saying that her daughter has all of these different problems. And so they start getting all kinds of government assistance. They get a house from Habitat for Humanity. And some of the different disorders and diagnosis that Dee Dee said that her daughter had there were so many different ones. I think I found an entire list of them.
There was like sleep apnea, leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and retardation.
Yeah.
Like she said she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old.
Yes. So epilepsy, that she was vision impaired, she was hearing impaired, she had a GI problem, she had anemia, she had asthma, allergies. Leukemia was the scariest one that they said they had diagnosed her with. Like, she had been diagnosed with leukemia, that's what she said. Lung disease, a heart murmur, and that she was technically retarded. So these were all of the things that Gypsy's mother had said that she had been diagnosed with, and she was being treated for years. So the muscular dystrophy, that one about saying that she couldn't walk, she had been sitting in a wheelchair for 14 years. Gypsy was in a wheelchair. When come to find out, as this all thing blows up, she doesn't have any of these actual diseases that she had been treated for. So as it starts to unravel, we figure out that Dee Dee Blanchard had Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So we've talked about this before because we were just talking about it with Maya Kowalski. And this is kind of that dynamic of what we talked about, was that that in Maya Kowalski, it was accused that the mother had it right away, right? And I really believe the difference, a lot of it has to do with the way the mother approached it, right? And so we knew that Maya Kowalski's mother, when she came into a hospital, she was very stern, very straight to the point, and demanded what kind of medication she wanted her daughter. And right away, whatever it was, it set off those bells for the hospital that they were like, ding, ding, ding. We think that this is potentially Munchausen syndrome. We think that maybe this mother is creating these illnesses and that they're not actually true. That also happened, you know, a couple of years ago. So we still have this developing. This Munchausen syndrome is still, I believe, very developing. And I think at the time it was definitely very rare. 2015 was probably more rare than people would have thought about it. Or to see it as actual child abuse, right? That's what they started seeing, that this was child abuse. So in Maya Kowalski's case that we had talked about before, it was much more quick of a diagnosis of people thinking that's what it was, and come to find out ended up not being. And here you have a real live Munchausen syndrome by a mother who's actually over medicating, manipulating, convincing doctors she has things that she does not, and giving her all of these different drugs and surgeries. The surgeries was really the crazy part. And so this opened up this investigation of like every department kind of going, what the heck did we do?
Yeah,
and what did we not do?
Yeah.
I think every single department was going, oh shoot, from the police department. So we find out that there was a welfare check done a couple years prior where they were believing that maybe Gypsy was being neglected, and that they ended up not thinking anything of it because the mother ended up convincing them there's nothing wrong. Then you had the doctors. You had doctors that actually were believing this mother enough to where they were doing surgeries. Like they had put in a feeding tube into Gypsy, of which she absolutely did not need.
I'm just so confused, like why no one was looking at like checking backgrounds and stuff like that. Like doctors were just believing Dee Dee like off of what she had to say.
Yeah.
It was just crazy to me.
I think it's because of how believable she must have come across. So if you watched any of the interviews,
she said she was very charming.
Very charming. I think both of them seemed just very, very charming about it. And and honest. It was like, I don't know if it's like the Southern accent, but was like Gypsy had this little girl voice. The mother seemed to have a very proper voice and seemed to be very, very respectful about it. So I think behind those things ended up meaning that people were more willing to believe what was being said to them.
Yeah, and I guess it would look bad in like they're figures of the community. Like you don't want to be the person that's questioning this sick, this doting mother and her sick child. Like you don't want to be the person that's like, are we really sure about this?
Yeah.
Like, so I think everyone just kind of goes along with it, and I could see that. I could definitely see that.
And I think that they went to such lengths to make it look physically believable.
She was shaving Gypsy's head.
Shaved her head.
Shaved her head.
Shaved her own daughter's head, of which wasn't even needed.
Crazy.
Insane. Shaved her head, and then her teeth started falling out.
Yeah, this was like a problem with all the medications that she was being given?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that's what they were thinking. They were thinking that that Gypsy was losing all of her teeth, and then her teeth started rotting and falling out because of the over medication of stuff that she didn't need for so many years. I mean, it's a whole different level of abuse than I think anybody could imagine because of how long it went. And I think it's just like when you think about it, you're like, it's still so hard to wrap your head around why would a mother do that to their child? And then we go back to like the psychology behind it and saying that they're doing it for attention for themselves, attention for their child.
Something they missed out on as a kid, they weren't taken care of. It's really psychological.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And with Gypsy, you see like everything. Like, so Gypsy got every single type of resource there was. She had like the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and she got to go to Disney World. She got to go eat with Cinderella. There was donations. They always had there was little local events where people were donating money to them. They had every single resource that they could potentially be at that were supposed to be for people who were really actually sick. And come to find out, she truly wasn't. It's just, I mean, like, I was trying to explain it to my hubby, and he was just like, you're telling me what do these parents do? Like, he had no idea that it was a real thing, that parents will either make their children sick when they're not sick, or they'll lie about them being sick when they're not sick, all for this potential attention grabbing, getting
this
syndrome.
Ego of like helping their like motherly duties. I can't wrap my head around it. I agree with your husband. I don't understand it. I questioned it the whole time I read this case. But I mean, do you think what they did makes it harder for people actually in need to get the resources they need because of a case like this?
You know, I don't know if I would say that the long-term effect is that now it makes it harder, is because I think it's still so rare. I think it's really, really rare, which is why, like, when I compared it to Maya Kowalski, it's heartbreaking, because I think there's no middle ground. We want to be sitting in that middle ground between Gypsy Rose is an opportunity where nobody did what they were supposed to do. They should have caught that was happening to this little girl. I mean, a lot of those ailments have actual tests that shows the results. When there are things like, let's say, Lyme disease or some of the other stuff that are harder to test for, to have that, objectable test. But with some of the stuff like leukemia and some of the other things, those you can clearly have a test that shows that those exist or not. So I really feel like there was a lot of failure for her. While you have Maya Kowalski, where it's like within 24 hours of her being in the hospital, they went straight to the fact that they thought it was Munchausen syndrome. So it's like there needs to be that nice medium that we've talked about, is like that's where it's at. But I don't think the long-term effect of something like this is like that it's going to be hard for people to get the resources. But what I do think it does, which always is heartbreaking, is when people take advantage of like GoFundMe and those kind of things. I think other people wanting to help, it deters them,
Yeah, it makes them, again, we circle back to trust.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
What's really happening?
Yep.
Is this real?
Yep, absolutely, which is what took place here. And I think that it's mind-blowing how many people, as it started to unravel, as they started to do the investigation. So they've got Dee Dee Blanchard, who has been brutally murdered, and they don't know where Gypsy Rose is. And by all accounts, they know that she that she's incapable of taking care of herself. She cannot walk. I mean, those are all the things that the investigation is figuring out initially. But that there was posts on a Facebook page that are saying things that Dee Dee's dead and that there's potentially a rape that took place. And so they are feverishly looking for this little girl because they think that she's now in harm's way. They end up finding her. They find her with her boyfriend, Nick. And that ends up starting this entire investigation when they start bringing them in. Watching, one of the things is, as when I did criminal defense, watching some of those interview videos are just so intriguing. It's so intriguing of how the interview takes place when you're in police custody. The questions that are being asked, but the way the people start to respond to them, and how the investigation kind of unravels. Like, what is the position going to be of the person when they're first being interviewed, and then how it changes. And with Gypsy, you really see that. Because I am still one of those people that are kind of a rock and a hard place between, I think it was real quick for people to go, yeah, Gypsy did this because her mom was abusing her, and had she not done this, her mom could have eventually killed her. Now, some of those facts are correct. I think with how intense her mother was, now that we know how bad this Munchausen syndrome was, I do believe that she was deteriorating her life. Absolutely. I think a feeding tube you don't need is very scary. And who knows what else she would have potentially been able to convince the hospital to do. It's still crazy that she was able to convince the hospital to do any of those procedures to begin with, but you would think that the hospital would have been able to stop anything more intense. But it was deteriorating the health of Gypsy Rose. But I don't think Gypsy knew that. I don't think she was able to truly grasp that if I don't get away from my mom right now, I may end up dead.
Okay, so you think she was like ignorant to it at the time of the death? Like,
yeah.
So would you say that it was more of her, you take more of the side that she was in love and she had a controlling mother?
Absolutely.
And this is where she needed to get out. Wasn't, and she realized from all the media, she was like, I can change my story to be this, not change her story, but kind of manipulate how she'd been manipulated this whole time. And
I don't even think that she changed the story. I think that's just kind of what devolved, like what evolved. I really do believe, and I've said this before because it's something I was kind of obsessed with a long time ago with a murder story of, I don't know if we talked about it, but Valessa Robinson's was a famous murder story when I was young in South Tampa, and she was a teenager who murdered her mother because her mother wouldn't let her see a boy. And it really kind of unraveled a lot of intricacies in my mind when I first started looking at it, and when I majored in psychology and we looked at crimes, I found it very interesting. What people don't realize is the adolescent love is the most intense love you can have.
It's once in a lifetime.
Never.
Once in a lifetime.
You can't compare to it. And it's because, I believe, it's so intense, raw, and new. It's like the first time you've ever loved anybody outside of your family. You haven't been really hurt yet. So, once you're older and you've had heartbreak, it's kind of like love isn't as strong, right?
It's a scam.
You're like, love this is great, but let me tell you what it could be, and what it may not be. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, he's fantastic, but is he lying to you? Does he have somebody on the side? So you love differently as you're older, but when you're 16, I'm like, that is, and I just remember when I've just always been interested in it. Love at 16 is the strongest type of love, and it is the love you'll kill for. You absolutely will. When you're older and you're 35, you're like, I'm not killing anybody for you right now. Okay,
you're not worth it. You're not worth it.
But really, where do you want to go? You're like, sure, we should do that. If you're telling me that you want your parents killed, I'm gonna be like, let's talk about this. Okay,
I think there's a therapist you need to talk to.
We can kind of just move to another city. We don't really have to do that. So you're also more intelligent.
That's a good way of putting
you think of the consequences. But when you're young and you're 16 and mama says you cannot see that boy, I'm like, those feelings and those emotions that rush through that body are so raw. They're so untapped. Like they're so uncontrollable. That's why I think she did it.
That's such a good
and
way
that's really where it is. And do I think that it has an element of her feeling trapped? Absolutely, because her mother had trapped her. Sure, 100%. And I think it has all the other pieces, but I don't think Gypsy thought, if I don't kill my mom, I'm going to end up dead. I don't think that's it. I thought she felt like, I cannot breathe. I'm suffocated. I'm never going to get out of here. She has chained me to the bed. She's going to keep me here forever. And maybe somewhere down the line, she thought she would be in harm's way because her mom, I think she had talked about her mom had abused her in different ways. But I don't think she thought at that moment it was life or death. I do believe it was the intense love.
The love was the catalyst for
love. I tell you, what love will make you do. So that's where I think it is. So she meets Nick. Nick Godege is his name, right? Godejean.
Okay.
Yeah, Godege.
And he's from Wisconsin. They meet on a Christian
dating
mingle?
site.
Christian dating site.
You know how many times I've heard about this Christian mingle being the starting point of an episode of a murder show? I mean, I don't know who these people are that are on these Christian dating shows, but dating sites. But yeah, so she meets him on a Christian dating site, and he is autistic, and you can tell that by the interview that he does after he's arrested, and autism where he's at on the spectrum. So he's got Asperger's, and I guess the way that his parents had stated is that they believe that he had the mental capacity of like maybe a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old, and he was never going to get any older. Autism usually comes with some of the other some of the other symptoms of you lack empathy. Don't have sympathy for people. You have a hard time making communications and connecting with people in the right way. But that empathy lacking is what you really see in Nick. But you also see this, like, I believe, like when you're listening to him, he seems very matter of fact to the point of like not understanding what he did was as wrong as it was. Like, and then he explains in the interview that he has several different personalities.
Yeah.
All of that seemed 100% real to me. I mean, I'm like, I saw it, I understood it, I got it. This is where that point comes into play of the question is, how culpable is somebody if they don't have the mental capacity to understand exactly what they did? Yeah. And that was some of the questions that were being asked, I think, while they were interviewing them. I think they were starting to realize, like, he's not 100% functioning at a normal capacity. I think you start realizing that. And they start realizing that even, I think, with Gypsy Rose there for a little bit, she seems to be lacking empathy.
Both attorneys, they questioned doing the insanity plea.
Yeah.
Neither one took it, and I thought that was very interesting. But they didn't go for the insanity plea, and they just. So I'm actually really curious about this because it is such an interesting case. Gypsy's attorney chose the defense of Munchausen by proxy, but I feel like that's so, like, I've never read about that as a defense. Like, I feel like that came up because of this case. Yeah,
so I don't know if it's ever been used as a defense. So ultimately what ends up taking place is that Gypsy she admits that she had asked and it had been her idea to have Nick, her also teenage lover, murder her mother. And that was the only way that they could be together. She says that Nick had said to her that he would protect her from anyone. And she had asked him, would you protect me from my mother? And he said, I would. And so that was how the whole entire conversation began. And then they plotted it. They plotted the gloves. She went and stole a knife from Walmart. She's the one who paid for his bus ride
from Wisconsin
to come there. She set it up. She told him how he could get into the house, let him know when her mom was asleep. So her mom goes to sleep on a night, and I guess they had a fight before her mom goes to sleep. And she does cry in a couple of interviews later on that she says that her mom did say to her, I just hope that you don't hurt me. So some reason her mom felt like, that
there was something going on.
Yeah, there was something going on.
I mean, that night she said, "Don't hurt me."
Yeah,
before
she said, "Don't hurt her," which I thought was kind of weird because it didn't seem to fit the narrative of like that Gypsy was kind of this frail, like weaker victim. So she lets in her boyfriend. He comes in, and Gypsy says that she goes into the fetal position in the bathroom while she knows exactly what Nick's doing. Nick stabs her mom 17 times over and over again, and then she lays there and she dies. And so they quickly start realizing that they have something to do with this murder once they find them, Nick and Gypsy. And they bring them into the precinct and they start interrogating them. They interrogate them separately. And that's where you get to kind of really see. Gypsy first tries to play dumb, like she didn't know her mom was killed. She's like, "What do you mean my mom's killed? My mom's dead. Oh my gosh!" And then it starts to kind of more unravel, where you really kind of see what's taking place. And Gypsy is the catalyst. Gypsy is the one who had the idea. Gypsy is the one who convinced this boy. This boy's free. He's not free. I mean, he had nothing holding him down. He was able to move and leave and take a bus and go places. So it was really her saying, the only way I can be with you is if you kill my mom, which we have seen this before. And so they end up going forward and they end up deciding to charge them both. And they decide to make the state attorneys decide to make the decision that they don't believe that this is a capital murder. They don't believe that the punishment should be the death penalty. And I definitely think by their conversations, it was because once they started unraveling it, I think everyone's mind was just like, I remember there's one officer who states and says, there was a point when we really realized that this victim who we were looking at, Dee Dee Blanchard, is maybe not a victim.
Okay.
Yeah, that she's not a victim, like that she had been committing crimes and she had been abusing her daughter, and that she wasn't as vulnerable as it looked like at the time. She wasn't
as innocent.
Yeah, as innocent as it seemed. And I think that's why they so quickly at the very beginning were like, okay, we are not going to seek the death penalty. So in that process, to explain to everybody how that works is that when a state attorney is deciding the ultimate charges that they're going to go forward, it can change, as we talked about before. But one of the things that they usually look at is when they're talking about the first degree murder, if they're going to charge you with first degree murder, are they going to seek the death penalty? Okay. And so they will decide based on the egregiousness of the nature of the crime, a lot of other factors of do they believe that the penalty for this should be death. Should death be on the table for them, or should it just be life in prison? So we're going to take our first break, and we will talk about some of those factors of how they determine do they want to seek the death penalty or not, and what they looked at in specifically this case with Gypsy Rose. Okay, welcome back to Legal Candy with Attorney Candice Colucci and our co-host Darby Mitkiss, our law student, to give us some of the legal analysis in the background. So we are talking about now the trial of Gypsy Rose, who is now still free, living her life on TikTok. And I've just been watching her videos, and I find it just so intriguing. I think most of the world's finding it intriguing. So we were talking about the state attorney's decision to not seek the death penalty. So they will decide if they think this is a first degree murder case, right? So somebody potentially premeditated this murder. They will decide, do we think we're going to go after the death penalty? Because a whole slew of things are different with the death penalty. In a death penalty case, you are entitled to now potentially 12 jurors and not 6 because it's death penalty. It's got a lot of other requirements. One of the things people don't think about is that not any attorney can represent you. You have to be technically, in most states, you have to be certified to be able to do a death penalty case.
I've heard about this. Even the judges have to go through a certain 2-week course in order to do death penalties. I didn't know that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, they're saying listen, if the penalty here is going to be someone's going to be put to death, we need everybody in the room to know what they're doing.
Yeah, everyone needs to understand what we're doing here. We're sentencing someone to death.
Yes, absolutely. So they decided not to seek the death penalty, which I thought was appropriate in this matter. I do think because of all of the intricacies of what took place and what kind of person that we're finding out that Dee Dee was, it was appropriate. So they do charge both of them with first degree murder, premeditated murder. Premeditated means you've taken the steps to plot, plan, prepare for a murder. It wasn't in the instance of all of a sudden that's going to be like a second degree murder. So they charge him with first degree murder. Gypsy Rose ends up taking a plea deal. So this is why people are wondering right now, how is this woman out? How is this girl out? At the time of the murder, she was 23. Her real age has always been kind of a question because her mother lied about her age to keep her seeming younger. You get more benefits that way, unfortunately. But she ends up taking a plea deal for second degree murder.
Her attorney obtained her medical records from Louisiana. Finally.
Okay. So we know she's 20.
So,
she was 23 at the time.
yeah.
So she's 23 at the time of the killing.
The plea bargain.
Yeah, but make no mistake, mentally she probably was developing much slower. I think because of obviously everything that she had been through. When you're in and out of hospitals all the time, you're not really in school and stuff. So, but she takes the plea deal, and the second degree murder in the state of Missouri had I think the least amount of time you had to be able to do was 10 years. So the 10-year sentence all the way up to a life. It could have been given a life. And the judge ended up giving her 10 years. So 10 years. And that is going to be because of all of the mitigating factors. So what happens when you are now going to sentencing before a judge or potentially before a jury, you get the opportunity to put forth something called mitigating factors. Okay. What are the mitigating factors that we should know about you that pretty much are going to make us more sympathetic to want to give you a less sentence?
So is this similar to like the rules of evidence and like what should or should not be known?
No.
Okay.
So at the sentencing, everything can come in.
Okay.
So at sentencing, the rules are there are no rules. At that point in time, you now are allowed to bring in things that you would not have been able to bring in during trial.
Okay.
So now we're going to bring in everything we know about you as your past. Some of the things that are mitigating would be, have you never committed another crime? Is this your first crime? You ever been in trouble? What was your childhood like?
Okay.
Tell us, were you abandoned, beaten, abused? Were you raped? Anything that could potentially make it to where we could probably understand why you may have committed this crime, or why maybe this is just a one-off. Okay. Were you abused, throughout your life? Did this person abuse you, but maybe wasn't abusing you that day? So those are all of the mitigating factors that would have came in for Gypsy. Would have been, tell us about your relationship with your mother, with Dee Dee Blanchard. And that would have been why, in my opinion, the judge would have said, okay, based on those factors, based on the fact that now we know that your mother was abusing you, she had Munchausen syndrome, and that you were not ill, and that she had physically held you down, given you, made you feed through a feeding tube. Oh, it's just a thought of it. Fed her through a feeding tube, kept her in a wheelchair for years, which could have made it to where she couldn't have walked. I mean,
honestly,
it
she
is
could have caused
insane.
it.
Yeah, she could have caused so many more things that could have been caused for it. That I think Gypsy's still young. We don't even know right now what are going to be some of those side effects of 14 years of drugs, of which she didn't need. So I think all that is what came to that 10-year mark, that 10-year sentence.
You know, on the 2020 TV show, I thought it was cool, or not cool, but interesting that she was like, I feel like I'm more free in prison than with living with my mom, because now I'm allowed to just live like a normal woman.
Yeah.
That's crazy that you are technically in prison for those 14 years, or her whole life, or how long it was, and then you're in prison and you feel relieved.
Yeah. No, that is how intense those feelings were for her. And I couldn't have imagined what life could have been like. I think she talked about one time she tried to run away and her mom found her, and her mom smashed her phone and her laptop. And I remember what it was like being grounded. With those days of being grounded, I'm like, I don't ever want to go back from when they took everything. And that was before we had a lot of stuff. It was like, they took your beeper. I mean, I was like the biggest thing. She's like, not my beeper. Not my tell me, my friends, please call. Please tell them I'm grounded. Call them back.
Not my Tamagotchis.
Yeah, Tamagotchis are all going to die. Please just feed my Tamagotchis. And so it was very you feel powerless, right? But she's an adult feeling that way. She wasn't a child anymore, and she had felt that way for so long. So I can imagine the freedom she felt. My problem comes down to, and here's when we'll talk about Nick. Nick's trial kind of broke my heart.
Okay.
And that was because we've talked about before, there's that element of mens rea, right? So you learned it in law school. In order for someone to be held liable for a crime, you have to have two elements. Mens rea, so that's the mental element, and then actually the act, right? So the mens rea says we only want to hold people criminally responsible for crimes that they knowingly actually did, mentally, knowingly, and had the knowledge that they were capable of doing it. So that's where you get things like the insanity plea. So if someone doesn't have the capacity to understand right from wrong, then that's when you'll see those things like those insanity pleas. Because if they don't have the mens rea, that mental element, then we have determined over time that they shouldn't be held liable for those crimes. And so in this instance, you have a boy who's autistic, severely autistic, and I don't think he rises to this. When your question was, why didn't they do the insanity plea? I don't think he rose to the level of 100% saying that he doesn't understand right from wrong. That's really what the question ends up coming down to. Is if you want to use the insanity plea, you've got to be able to prove to doctors that you are not able to understand and the magnitude of what you're done, that there's consequences, right from wrong, those kind of things. So I don't think he was all the way there, because I think even with his diagnosis and how he could articulate himself, how he was able to get on a bus, he could probably have answered a doctor's questioning of like, is it wrong to murder? And his answer would have been like, yeah, it's wrong to murder. But he definitely had the diminished capacity in order to, I believe, really understand the gravity of what he was doing at that time. I think he really did believe that he had to save Gypsy from her mother, or something would have happened to her. I think that's what he believed, because
he was a knight.
Somebody had told him
armor.
that. Yes, because Gypsy had told him that. The question that I always get asked is, in my head, when we're talking about when somebody convinces somebody else to kill, and the question is, how culpable is that person? Over time, in a lot of cases that get tried, where somebody convinces somebody else to murder for them, a lot of times you'll see they get the same sentence. But then there's a lot of times they get a lesser sentence. And the reason why they usually get a lesser sentence is because most of the time they rat out the person who actually did the murder. But I always have a hard time in my gut of like, well, you're the reason why they did that. But I get why some people will really say, well, really, the other person shouldn't. Just because someone tells them to murder doesn't mean that they should go and murder and they should get off on it.
Yeah, it's if your friends tell you to jump off the bridge, you jump off the bridge.
Exactly.
Like, you know not to jump off the bridge.
And that's understandable.
You know
but
not to murder that person.
Yeah, you should know. But I think in this instance, what makes this a little different is that he had a diminished capacity. He was autistic.
So why didn't he get to benefit off of a plea deal like Gypsy Rose did for these mitigating factors then? Why did he get first degree murder? And you know what I mean?
Because he's the one who actually pulled the trigger. And they will not give an offer of something as low as 10 years to somebody like that. He's the person who did the brutal murder. And I think a lot of it came afterwards and it always breaks my heart too, is because we still are living in a system that doesn't understand mental health. Like that's still overarching. Does it mean that someone who has mental health issues shouldn't go to jail? No. I think that there should be a better system in place. There should be mental hospitals. Florida doesn't have a strong mental hospital anymore, and people don't realize that. It's like right now, when you are mentally incapacitated and you commit a crime and you're determined that you are not capable of standing trial, they have to release you, when they used to send you to mental hospitals where they would lock you up. We don't have those anymore, really, and most states have really done away with them, which is unfortunate. People don't realize that. And that's so sad, because there needs to be a place where you can lock somebody up who has a mental disorder, who has committed a crime, and you're treating them differently than someone who has knowingly committed a crime. There should be a difference. So in this instance, I think this is one of those examples where it really broke my heart, is because had this man, Nick, not met Gypsy, would he have committed a crime? Probably not. Probably not. There's no way to really tell that, but she played a huge role, the most pivotal role, in getting him to kill for her. While she went to jail, ended up only serving 8 years, and he ends up going to trial. Now, his trial ended up being very interesting, because you never know what's going to happen during trial. You never know if the person who convinced you who's going to point fingers at what's going to happen. And this ended up being the love story that continued to kind of unravel on in real life on the trial, it still was this love story. So she takes the stand. Gypsy Rose takes the stand in the defense. So the defense calls her, not the prosecution, ends up being the defense. She ends up being the star witness for the defense. And she does take the stand in the most like Romeo and Juliet way of like love never dies no matter what through death.
I need to read a dating book by her because she just like gets men for
listen, there's something about that crazy love. She had it because she takes the stand and she says that she loved him and that she was the one who told him. It was her idea. She had plotted it. Wow. She had planned it. She did all of that in an effort to try to save him, I think, one last time, because he now was on trial for first-degree murder and the sentence would have been life in prison. So I really thought, I remember watching parts of this, and I remember thinking then that I really felt that because of how you can never predict what a jury will do. You can never predict what a jury will do. The same facts could have been tried in a different city and it would have been a different result. And in this case, I thought the jury was going to come back with second degree. I really did. I really thought that once they found out about him, he doesn't take the stand, so you don't hear it from him. But you saw his interviews where he admits that he has another personality. He admits that, that he believed that he was a vampire, like all of this other stuff. And you can tell in the interview he's not all there. I would have thought that would have played a role in the jury to have maybe gone with second degree murder, because the difference between first degree and second degree would have been the concept of premeditated, you plotted it. So one of the defenses that his attorneys had, which was ultimately the defense that would make sense at the time of the trial, would have been to have said he lacked the mens rea, the mental element, to have been able to to have premeditated this murder. And so they were asking, by the end of trial, they went from wanting a not guilty, and this happens sometimes, when they start trial, they're hoping for a not guilty. But as the facts start coming out and they're seeing how they're looking, they're going, you know what?
We got to reevaluate.
Let's reevaluate, which I have so much respect for an attorney who can do that, because it's not easy to do that. So that's exactly what they did. They go back to the drawing board and they're like, by the time closing arguments happens, they're in closing arguments saying, listen, guys, we're not here to tell you that he wasn't the one who actually murdered Dee Dee. We're here to tell you that he wasn't all mentally there. He lacks the mental capacity, and we're asking for you to find him guilty of the second degree murder and to find something more appropriate than life in prison for this kid. And the jury came back with first degree murder. And that was one for me that I was like, I've seen a jury come back in facts less than this, where they don't have like autistic, like a defendant that's autistic, that's so clear that he has a diminished capacity, where they have come back with second degree murder. But this one, they came back and it was just kind of like, because also Gypsy had taken the stand and said, this was my plan. Like this, I'm the one who wanted him to do that. And I felt like I needed it or I would have died. Like he was my knight in shining armor. He saved my life. Like she was telling the jury this, and the jury was just like, they were like, no way. They were like, this person needs to be in jail for the rest of his life. And that's always been a hard question for me, is like, do I feel like he needs to be there for the rest of his life?
Or can he be rehabilitated?
Can he be rehabilitated? Is the question. And the answer is, if we had mental hospitals, then I would hope that a sentence of maybe like 35 years or something like that, with the opportunity of parole. I'm a very big fan of the way parole works. An opportunity of parole, of showing that you have been rehabilitated, would have been something that maybe I would have felt more comfortable with. But at the end of the day, he did murder somebody. He did take the life of someone. Whether she was, and now as it kind of unraveled, we learned much more about her, that she was a career fraudster, that she was always committing fraud. And also, I think her grandparents came forward and they said that they believed that she had been poisoning the grandmother with Roundup. Yeah, so that she had done that before, and that
her own mother.
Yeah, and her own mother.
Food and
they think that maybe she had starved her own mother. So, doesn't make it right that she ends up being murdered, but it is really heartbreaking because even her own family, I guess they couldn't, nobody wanted to take her ashes. Like they were like her own family. Her sister was saying, her sister and her grandparents and her daughter, nobody wanted to take it, and her sister made a comment of like, you should just flush it down the toilet.
Oh my God.
That is how much of a horrible person they thought Dee Dee Blanchard was. So it was just interesting how it all kind of unravels. But now we've got Gypsy out, only serving 8 years. What do we feel about that? And I think that I think everybody lost sight of the fact that whether she was justified or not, I believe there's other things she could have done. I don't believe that she had exhausted all of her options at 19, 23, whatever age it was, 23 years old, that the only option she had was death. But I think the more tragic part is that because of her actions and her manipulation, she convinced somebody else to murder for her who had a diminished capacity. And I think that should have probably led her to spend more time in jail than 8 years. If it had just been she ended up murdering her mom and it was just the two of them, you know what I mean? And then they gave her 8 years for that, maybe. I mean, but the point is there was another innocent life that you knowingly, and now we know Gypsy is very mentally capable.
Yeah, you brought someone else into this plot.
Yes, that I don't know if she's as innocent and as you know, without culpability as I think people have said. So I'm happy. I think that once we've unraveled this whole thing, my heart breaks for Gypsy Rose. It's upsetting that we got to the place that we're at, and I think a lot of people failed her. But it also breaks my heart for this kid that I think had a diminished capacity who ends up in life in prison while she gets to go live her life. And she played a very pivotal role in the fact that he murdered her mother. I just don't see. I don't like his charge. I just straight up don't like his charge. Yeah.
I can ration with Gypsy's charge. Weirdly enough, like I feel like she kind of lived in this bubble where I could see she only living in extremes.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why she really only thought this was her only way out. But then she had these other resources of finding a man online and making him kill for her. Like, there's so many questions I have where I'm like, could she have found other ways? Or was she living in this manipulated bubble where she was only watching Disney movies where she, you know, there was only one way out or the other? Like, she lived in this castle and she needed to get out. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. No, for sure. And I have the utmost respect for her, the way she handled herself on the stand. Because a lot of times in these, this is not the first time we've seen these facts of where somebody convinces somebody else to murder for them. But I think it was one of the first times that we saw a very honest portrayal when she took the stand to say, this was my idea. This wasn't his.
Wow.
I think it's important talking about the stand too, that the state psychologist was able to testify, but Nicholas's psychologist was not allowed to testify in his defense. And it says that in denying the motion, the judge conceded that an appeals court could find that point significant and consider it a reversible error.
Yeah.
And they have filed an appeal.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Awesome. So we'll talk about this.
He had
that's an interesting, yeah.
He had an appeal on an ineffective counsel as well. And I thought that was interesting. And what really constitutes ineffective counsel? I mean, is your Sixth Amendment, but like, I think it has to be such a high standard for that to like win over as an appeal.
And if his psychologist couldn't testify, then how could they establish diminished capacity?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just think that's.
He might have a strong case for appeal. I think he might get a lesser sentence, especially with all this media about Gypsy Rose and how she had such a light sentencing. And I don't know. I think there's. I think he has a shot.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time today, but I think it may not be a bad idea to just look into a little bit to tell our viewers why did the court deny the ability of his psychologist to come forward, because it absolutely could be a reversible error, because it was so important to, I believe, explain to a jury that he really wasn't mentally all there. I mean, it was clear from the interview. I mean, I've done enough of these to look at them to know, but it was definitely very clear. So thanks everybody for joining in with Legal Candy. If there's anything else you want to hear, reach out to us. Let us know. Send us an email. Our office is 727-733-9438. Send us an email at office, OFF, ICE at Colucci, COLUCCI, Law Group, all one word, .com. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about today or any legal advice that you potentially need, reach out to us. If we can't help you, we'll put you in the right direction. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next week.